In August 2000, Bob Maher found himself in the finals of the Magic the Gathering World Championships. His finals opponent played 71 out of 75 of the cards in his deck list. Both of these players would go on to be first ballot Pro Tour Hall of Famers, and they both would win an invitational and have cards created in their likenesses. You might even recognize Bob Maher's opponent. The match was broadcast on ESPN2 and is largely considered one of the greatest matches of Magic ever played. In Game 1, with a 1919 in play from a Phyrexian processor, Maher cast Crumbling Sanctuary before attacking. From there, Finkel deployed his own Phyrexian processor, and because Maher made the choice to attack Finkel's library and not his life total, Finkel was able to pay 19 life when his Phyrexian processor hit the table, and thanks to a couple of Thran Dynamos and Voltaic keys, Finkel was able to churn out 2 1919s a turn to Maher's 1, eventually winning the game and the match shortly after. For Bob Maher, a runner-up finish at Worlds was the cap on a miraculous season, one in which he finished as the Player of the Year despite having one of the lowest winning percentages a Player of the Year has ever had. But this match and this Player of the Year run aren't how Bob cemented his status as the Great One, and this match wasn't even the most interesting one he played that season. What you're about to see is a match so bizarre, it almost defies explanation. There are unsleeved dual lands, there are beads instead of dice, and, inexplicably, a Beanie Baby. Above all else, it is the story of one player who refused to lose, and another who refused to win. Fate tried to intervene, but both of these men told Fate to go pound sand. This is, without a doubt, the greatest match of Magic the Gathering ever played. Okay, so the year is 1999. It's December. We're in the finals of Pro Tour Chicago. Bob Maher versus Brian Davis. They're playing for $10,000, which, you know, in the 90s, that was a lot of money. They're playing Extended, which used to more or less fill the role that Modern currently fills. At the time of Pro Tour Chicago, Extended consisted of a handful of sets, but what made the format really weird is that they shoehorned in the original dual lands from Revised. They've never pulled a cycle of cards into a format without reprinting them, and it's unlikely we'll see that ever again. In hindsight, Extended had a pretty small ban list for this tournament. Here are some cards that were legal for this tournament that are now banned in Legacy. Both players played decks that hinged on one of these cards. First, Bob Maher. His deck presented as an Oath of Druids deck, but in reality, it was an Enlightened Tutor deck, featuring a slew of artifacts and enchantments capable of shutting opponents down all by themselves. Null Rod's good against artifacts. Ivory Mask is the original Leyline of Sanctity. Powder Keg beats up on creatures. You get the picture. Oath of Druids was the de facto win condition, but if we're being honest, the creatures in this deck are pretty lousy. Maher was more likely to win with one of the Silver Bullet Enlightened Tutor targets, or God forbid, Treetop Village, than he was to win with a Shard Phoenix off an Oath of Druids. And then, there were all the counter spells, which makes sense. Once the game revolves around one game piece that's shutting down a player all by itself, what better way to maintain that game piece's presence on the battlefield than with counter magic? The parlay this deck placed was as follows. I have an Enlightened Tutor target in my deck that will beat my opponent by itself. Because artifacts and enchantments are harder to remove, I have more than enough counter magic to deal with every card they have that's capable of removing that Enlightened Tutor target. From there, who cares what your win condition is? If time wasn't a factor, Maher could even loop 2 copies of Gaia's Blessing and wait till an opponent decked. The wins with this deck weren't pretty, but its effectiveness was undeniable. He would win a Grand Prix with the deck a month later. Which brings us to Brian Davis. We'll talk about his Necropotence deck in a second, but first we need to talk about the man himself. Brian Davis would go on to have a solidly above-average pro Magic career by parlaying his finish at Pro Tour Chicago into a 4-year stay on the Pro Tour gravy train. In 1999, he'd win Rookie of the Year, and in 2002, he'd even top-8 another Pro Tour in Nice. All the winning Brian Davis did after the fact is important because A, we're about to point out a bunch of his mistakes, and B, this match is going to unfairly hound him for the rest of his career. As for the deck he played, well, it's pretty infamous. Necropotence, originally printed in Ice Age in 1995, was dismissed by everybody, scoring a 1 out of 5 rating from Inquest magazine. Like most cards from this era, the text box is a little weird, so Scryfall, please show me a version of this card that makes sense. Thank you. Necropotence is an enchantment that lets you exchange one resource for another. In this case, life for cards. Like I said, Necropotence was roundly dismissed by the vast majority of magicians, but there was a precedent for cards like this. Kind of. In sharp contrast, everyone understood Channel right off the bat because its application was clear. The mana goes into a fireball that you shoot at your opponent. But trading life for cards was a different thing, because I guess most people couldn't see the correlation between drawing lots of cards and winning games. Because, well, you know the deal. But then Pro Tour 1 happened. The main event was won by a 62-card pile that could be most charitably described as stone unplayable by today's standards, but sitting there in third place was a deck that revolved around Necropotence. On this chart of the mana curve of the top 8 decks from Pro Tour 1, it's pretty clear that Lindback's doing something else entirely. While everyone else loaded up on powerful 4-drops on their way to 5 and 6 mana spells, Lindback's curve stopped at 4. He realized that because Necropotence ensures a steady stream of cards, the most likely way for him to lose a game would be with a bunch of expensive spells clogging up his hand. So, for the most part, he just didn't play them. Pro Tour New York's junior division winner, Graham Tatimer, took the Necro deck one step further, complementing the skull with 3 copies of Demonic Consultation, which judges laughed at him for playing. Tatimer would have the last laugh. Okay, this text box doesn't really make sense either, so I'll walk you through it. This is game 2 of the Davis-Maher match, and Davis names Necropotence. So first, he's going to exile the top 6 cards. So 1, okay, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, stop the tape. So those 6 cards they're just gone. Then after that, you mill cards one at a time until you hit the named card. So roll it again. Boom. Boom. Okay, stop. There's Necropotence. In hindsight, I think the reason people were skittish about Necropotence and Demonic Consultation is their fail states are pretty intense. Both cards can just cause you to lose the game on the spot. Necropotence can lock you out of ever drawing a card again once you run out of life. Demonic Consultation can literally cause you to deck yourself. These fail states are so intense that they obfuscate their respective fail rates. Let's go back to game 2 between Maher and Davis real quick. When Brian Davis casts the Demonic Consultation, he has 48 cards left in his library, 4 of which are Necropotence. So the likelihood that all 4 Necropotences are among the top 6 cards in his library is 0.00007%. Okay, cool. Look, I get it. Demonic Consultation is a scary proposition. You're exiling your deck. But with a deck list like this, with so many redundant pieces that perform so much better with a Necropotence in play, the upside on a card like Demonic Consultation is at least worth checking the math over. So how do these decks interact with each other? Let's look at Brian Davis's deck first, because it's always going to do the same thing against any opponent. Resolve a quick Necropotence, shred their hand in battlefield with discard and spot removal, refill with Necro, build towards 6 lands, and then start firing off Drain Life and Corrupt to lock a game up. Bob Maher's playing a more reactive strategy, so it's on him to figure out how to weather Davis's assault. Davis's hand disruption is going to be excellent against Maher, but at the same time, Maher has a high density of counter magic in his deck. Even if Davis duresses a counterspell away, Maher could easily draw another, which actually happens multiple times throughout the match. The most important aspect of Maher's deck, though, is this card. Mercadian Masks was released on October 4th, 1999, 2 months before Pro Tour Chicago, making this the first Pro Tour to feature Mercadian Masks cards at all. Coming off of Versa block, Mercadian Masks was seen by players as a deliberate downshift in power level, and it was. But 2 Mercadian Masks cards in particular had an outsized impact on this match. The first is Unmask, which is the inspiration for this card. Because Necropotence gives you access to so many cards turn after turn, the drawback on the pitch cards suddenly isn't so bad, because, again, your bottleneck is generally going to be mana. This is why Necro didn't really take off in Type 2 until Contagion, a card from Alliances, was printed. And it's why Unmask was the perfect card for Necropotence, a nice complement to the perfect card against Necropotence. Before Ivory Mask, nothing gave players Shroud, or even Hexproof. It was, at the time, the latest enchantment for 2/2 white that just messed people up. And for Brian Davis, there's almost no way around this thing. It single-handedly nullifies 60% of the spells in his deck, including his win conditions. Once Ivory Mask hits, the game becomes all about Davis finding one of his 6 outs, and even then, they have to make it past all of Maher's counter magic, which is safe from Unmask and Duress thanks to, you guessed it, Bob Maher's game plan is to weather the early turns as best as possible and try to set up Ivory Mask. His relevant cards to counter are first and foremost Necropotence. But if Necropotence hits the table, the best Maher can do is lock Davis under his own Necro by countering all his life gain, thus keeping him from being able to continually refill his hand every turn. This is easier said than done, but hey, it's a plan.
Hello and welcome to the finals of 1999 Pro Tour Chicago. I'm Randy Bueller. I'm here with Brian Hacker, and we're really looking forward to this championship match between Bob Maher Jr. on the right hand of your screen and Brian Davis on the left.
God, I love watching these old matches. They're the best. Look at this. Striped judge shirts, so they look like referees. The aforementioned Beanie Baby, complete with tag protector, because, again, it was the 90s. The head judge, denoted by the red stripes on his shirt, flips a coin, and it's on the ground. The table has no branding on it whatsoever. And then there's the no sleeves. Given the versions of the cards they're playing, here's how much each player's deck is worth in 2022. This is what they're shuffling with no sleeves. Obviously, these cards were worth much less in 1999, but still, it just takes a minute to get over. All right, let's check in on game 1.
Waste you. All right, so Bob has a land and a card.
Holy. What the hell happened? Oh, I see what happened. Okay. Maher mulled to 5, and Brian Davis had... Okay, I get it. So this game's over, right? We can just fast forward to the end?
Welcome back. It's now time for game 2 of the finals of Pro Tour Chicago. Bob Maher Jr. is up 1-0 after a miraculous comeback in game 1.
Okay. I guess we'll just have to watch the tape.
All right, so Bob has a land and a card.
Okay, so Davis is at 10 after this Necro with a hand of Nevinyrral's Disc, Contagion, Necropotence, Corrupt, and 4 Swamps, one of which he discards to hand size. This hand is not super great. Davis would love to discard the redundant Necropotence here, but he's at 10 and doesn't want to be dead to an errant treetop village. So that Necropotence is earmarked to be exiled in order to cast Contagion. Corrupt and Nevinyrral's Disc are really strong cards, but Davis only has 1 land on the battlefield, meaning he's going to give Maher 3 free turns before dropping the Disc, and then 2 more free turns on top of that before he can cast the Corrupt. This is the inherent flaw of a more controlling Necropotence deck. Without a recurring source of damage, Brian Davis is going to find himself in this spot often in this particular matchup. Yes, he's got a Necropotence, and yes, he's way up on cards, but once Necropotence is on the battlefield, Brian Davis's spells that impact the game cost 4, 6, and more than 6. By contrast, Maher's counterspells cost free, 1, 2, and 3. Davis can sandbag hand disruption spells to clear the way for a Drain Life or a Corrupt, but that gives Maher a lot of time to set up. Once this turn ends, both players spend the next 6 turns basically just staring at each other. Play land, go. Play land, Necro for 2. Play land, go. Play land, Necro for 1. Say go. Land, Nevinyrral's Disc, Necro for 2, go. Land, go. Unmask, gets countered, Necro for 2, go. Say go. Land, drain you, gets countered, Necro for 1, go. Brainstorm, land, go, and then finally, on the 9th turn of the game, Brian Davis, whose hand is glutted with expensive cards, cards that don't matter, you name it, finally gets to resolve a Drain Life for 4. I want to show you something that Brian Davis does on his first turn that I think is telling. Pay close attention to Davis's graveyard and exile pile. Okay, so he grabs both the Unmask and the Corrupt he exiled in order to cast it, and just kind of puts the Corrupt back and puts the Unmask above his library. Okay, and yep, Yep, that's not where your graveyard is, homie. What are you doing, you goofus? Magic, especially at this level, is more difficult than most viewers can imagine. My analysis comes with the benefit of being at a computer in a relaxed setting, not to mention the 22 years worth of hindsight I have. Brian Davis, on the other hand, is 15 years old, playing Wizard Squares for $10,000 with multiple cameras on him at the tail end of a decade where logic did not exist yet. It's probably very easy to allow that setting, that moment, to completely override your decision making. And I think that's what's happening here. From this point on, Brian Davis has two opponents, Bob Maher and Brian Davis. He knows his draw is good, and he's feeding off the energy of the crowd. Maher's going to have one land after his Tundra gets wastelanded. This Morphling he has in hand might as well be a ham sandwich. This Unmasked deserves so much better, but Davis smells blood in the water. So, he unmasks the Morphling, Necros to 5, discards a Swamp to hand size for the second time, does a bunch of other stuff, and then misses a land drop on turn 6. And it's a brutal miss. A land drop on turn 6 plus the unmask he threw away on the Morphling clears the way for Drain Lives to resolve on consecutive turns.
Something. Yeah. Waste one of the blue mana and then corrupt, right?
Yeah, that's right. No, he didn't. And he's gonna get it first.
What's that? What was that?
Randy Buehler and Brian Hacker point to that play as the pivotal mistake he made during this game. And it is a mistake, don't get me wrong. But unfortunately, it goes much deeper than that. For the rest of the game, Davis will not resolve another spell that gains him life. Right on cue, after Maher gets Davis to activate Nevinyrral's Disc to destroy Sylvan Library, Maher draws Ivory Mask. Given ample time to demonic Consultation for the second Nevinyrral's Disc, Davis declines and is rewarded for his obstinacy when one comes off the top of his library on turn 17. But that's still too late. Bob Maher already has the answer.
Down. Confidently lays the disc. Bob, okay.
Well, we know
Wow,
Bob
the last disc.
can't disenchant it because the Aura Silence is still in the graveyard.
Right. He
So
can draw Guy's Blessing it
that's a
back
disc.
in, and get it as the cantrip card.
Link tutor.
But he can get null.
Before sideboarding, Brian Davis only has 2 cards in his deck that can handle a resolved Ivory Mask. 2 copies of Nevinyrral's Disc. And Null Rod shuts off the disc. So game 1 is essentially a race. Davis has to win the game before those 2 cards enter the battlefield, and for a second there, game 1 looks pretty good. And then Davis spots Maher 6 or so free turns, which amounts to plenty of time for Maher to draw some permission, smooth his draws, and assemble the lock against little resistance past turn 2. Game 1, Bob Maher.
I would like to caution the audience to be quiet. I think the players can hear, and Brian Davis does clearly look rattled right here.
He's looking down thinking, Ritual, Necro, after an Unmask? How is that not enough?
Reeling from a mulligan to start game 2, Davis's draw is much less explosive. Discard spells save Davis from an Enlightened Tutor and 2 counter spells, but they can't save him from the top of Maher's deck. And down comes Compost. Is Compost as good as Ivory Mask here? Well, no. No, it's not. But it does allow Bob Maher to effectively keep pace with all the cards Brian Davis draws off Necropotence, which Davis plays the very next turn. For the first time all match, Maher's Treetop Village gets rowdy, sending Davis to 11 and effectively cutting him off from 3 cards from the Necropotence. Nevinyrral's Disc hits the table, and Maher, suddenly flooding out in spectacular fashion, can only put Davis to 3 with a pair of Treetop Villages. With his back against the wall, Davis casts Corrupt with 7 swamps in play, planning on blowing the disc once Maher moves to attacks. Unfortunately for Davis, Sacred Ground still triggers, and while Maher may not have dealt any damage on the turn, Maher still got those Treetop Villages rolled up for the very next turn. Staring at a suddenly loaded hand full of unknowns and facing down pressure from Maher's lands, Davis fires off a Persecute, making that 3 out of 3 counterspells this game that Maher was forced to use on something other than Drain Life or Corrupt. With 4 untapped lands staring across at just a reflecting pool and 3 unknown cards, Davis can cast Dark Ritual into a Corrupt for 8 damage and a 16-point life swing, but chooses not to. And I'll admit it, this sequence of events is the one that broke me.
We're going to need to do some math on whether that Swords to Plowshares in Bob's hand will allow him to live. He's got 8 play, so if he Rituals, Corrupts for 8, that would put Bob at 5.
Right.
The following turn, he drops a land,
Ninth.
putting him at 9, and can
Drains for
drain for
7.
7, which
Plow takes Bob up to 8.
right, which puts Bob at 1. Yep. So oddly, the correct play here, if he could see Bob's hand, would be to say good
He
done.
says done.
And Davis, who seems to have,
He's afraid of Force of Will. Bob only has 2 cards in his hand.
I don't
now,
think
can Brian win this game if Bob has Force of Will? How does it help to let Bob untap? How does that help?
I don't know. I think someone's standing behind Bob and signaling to Davis what Bob has in his hand, because this guy's just crazy. He seems to always know what to do. Always. It's just amazing. Like, it's uncanny. Like, once in a while he'll make a mistake, but for the vast majority of the time, he seems to have like some psychic ability to know when to hold off and when to go for it. I don't really understand it, because he wouldn't know the Swords to Plowshares in his hand.
I'm not convinced he should be playing around Plow.
Yeah, he should. He
can
probably
do that
shouldn't
next
be,
turn.
but it's going to work for his advantage hugely, given that Bob didn't draw a counterspell, and as long as Brian Davis still tries to corrupt and drain life him out.
He drew a land, so now he's fine.
Now he's got to do it. I mean, his back's to the wall now. There's no stopping it here.
Corrupt you? How much is it? 9. Sure.
Corrupt you for 9? Sure. All right, Davis goes up to 12. Bob drops to 4.
Now, at this point, he should know that there is no counterspell in Bob's hand, because Bob would certainly counter this, because then he would just attack and win the game the next turn. So if Davis thinks it through, he should know there's no counterspell in Bob's hand. Now, will Bob draw a counterspell? He draws a Lightning Tutor. That shouldn't do it. Davis should win this game.
Is there any way for
Remarkable.
Bob to win? Despite discarding a Wasteland, Davis wins anyway. He just outraces him with drains and corrupts to the head.
This is a very, very exciting final. I think this might go down to the wire.
Yeah, now Davis has got to have a little confidence. If he really does win this game, he's still a little nervous right now. He's like, Bob draws a counterspell. Bob pulled stuff out, had something up his sleeve last game.
The only thing we had better hope is that he doesn't drain him for 4, or even drain for 7. He's got to drain him for the full maximum.
Yeah, the only way Maher wins this game is if Davis drains for 4. I mean, Davis could say drain for 4. If Davis says drain for 4, then Maher is going to take a 2-0 lead.
Yeah, and we might see a grown man cry.
He's 15, he's not a grown man.
Activate. Alright. Attack.
Yeah, as long as Davis sinks everything into the drain, he wins. 2 treetop villages knock Davis down to 6. So it's 6-4. Did Brian just reach over and tap Miser's Cage? Yeah, he reached over and tapped the Miser's Cage. Come on, don't say 4!
Do it.
Shh, don't, guys, be quiet.
Turn you for 4.
Oh my God. I can't believe he did that. All he has to do is tap 3 more lands.
What's amazing here?
It's too late. He said drain life for 4. It's on the stack.
What's amazing here is the top deck of the disc is the worst card he can draw, because then he's
left 4
actually
mana for the
tempted to
disc.
leave the 4 mana open
Doesn't
for the disc.
matter.
If he draws an utter piece of garbage, he won't keep 4
Oh my.
mana open for the disc. And guess what happens next turn? He's got an Enlightened Tutor in his hand.
Oh my.
Anybody
Tutor for
have
Ivy
any
Mask.
guesses what Bob's gonna
Is
Enlightened
it a
Tutor for?
Mercadian Masks card?
So despite
Oh,
the
it's an
fact,
aura. How can he?
Okay.
Bob Maher Jr.
Ooh, boy. Okay, here's what I think happened. Bob Maher's at 13, and Brian Davis has 8 swamps to go with a Corrupt and a Drain Life in hand, which, as the board sits, are worth 14 damage if they resolve. After the Persecute gets countered, Brian Davis has the option to play Dark Ritual Corrupt, but instead just says go. Bueller and Hacker attribute this choice to Davis playing around Swords to Plowshares, and if he was playing around Swords to Plowshares, that's what turn 10 would look like. However, Brian Davis neglects to play around Swords to Plowshares on turn 12, which means he was probably never playing around Swords to Plowshares. He was playing around Disrupt, which is absurd, but ended up being correct given Maher's hand and his next 2 cards, because as Brian Hacker observed, a Corrupt for 8 and a Drain Life for 7 gets beat by a Swords to Plowshares, but again, Brian was never playing around a Swords to Plowshares at any point, because he could have beaten it if he wanted to on turn 12, while also still playing around Disrupt by just tapping 3 more lands for that last Drain Life. But Brian Davis, for the first and last time all match, reaches out and pokes Bob Maher's little tchotchke, a miser's cage, nestled in a Beanie Baby. As the story goes, those were on loan to Bob from someone else you may have heard of. Anyway, Davis reaches out, touches Maher's little knick-knack in a fit of showmanship, and draws Nevinyrral's Disc, a valuable card in the matchup, but nowhere in the zip code of relevant on this board. You're going to have a tough time convincing me that that little tap of the miser's cage didn't play a part in clouding Brian Davis's judgment. Brian Davis is not bad at Magic. He's certainly good enough to correctly assess that the value of a Nevinyrral's Disc isn't very high when you're sitting at 6 life against a Fairy Conclave and a trio of treetop villages. He just didn't this time. And like that, he found himself down 0-2 and desperately trying to pick up the pieces. In Game 1, Davis got way out in front against Mulligan to 5, only for compounding minor mistakes to culminate into a Necrolock that saw Brian Davis pop a Nevinyrral's Disc the turn before Maher dropped an Ivory Mask. The next game, it was Davis that had to weather a beatdown, and it looked like some unconventional choices would get him there, only for one lapse in concentration to turn a sure win into a devastating loss. The third game starts out a lot like the first one, only this time, the turn 1 on Mask is very necessary, clearing away the force of will that would have stopped Davis's turn 1 Necropotence in its tracks. In response to the second turn on Mask, Maher casts Brainstorm and subsequently shows Brian Davis a handful of garbage, indicating that Maher hid the good cards on top of his deck. So, Davis settles in. In this game, he's got the cards to do it. Nevinyrral's Disc from Alpha is the inspiration behind the colorless cards after it that also indiscriminately deal with all permanents. Here's a version of Nevinyrral's Disc that makes sense when you read it. In this matchup specifically, it's an important card for a couple of reasons. First of all, the obvious. Nevinyrral's Disc is one of 2 cards in Brian Davis's deck capable of destroying Maher's trump card, Ivory Mask. Secondly, after the first 2 games, Bob Maher's plan in the matchup is clear. Priority 1 is to stop a Necropotence from hitting the table, but in the absence of being able to do that, the plan is to Necrolock Brian Davis. A Necrolock happens when the player who controls the Necropotence has no relevant cards in hand and can't pay any more life to draw any relevant cards. It's what happened in Game 1, and now that Necropotence is on the battlefield, Bob Maher is going to try and do it again by countering anything that could disrupt the Necrolock. And because Nevinyrral's Disc destroys Necropotence, thus giving Brian Davis his draw step back, Maher has to deal with all of those too. And Brian Davis knows it. In this game, he's more than happy to leverage Nevinyrral's Disc as a 4-mana duress in order to get Maher's counter magic out of the way, so he can start firing off Corrupts and Drain Lives, which give him enough life to Necro into more, and eventually win the game. All told, Game 3 is a nice representative sample of how the Necropotence versus Counterspell matchup is supposed to go. Brute force through a skull, draw a bunch of cards, trade your cards for their cards, and then keep refilling. By the end of turn 5, Bob Maher has 6 counterspells either in the graveyard or in exile. None of them traded for a Drain Life or a Corrupt. He's down to 1 card in his hand and 1 on top of his deck, and both are trash. Brian Davis doesn't know they're trash, but honestly, it doesn't even matter. Davis is holding 2 pair with Persecute high, and he converts this dominating position into a win. However, Facing down a Morphling, which used to actually be a good card in 1999, Brian Davis resolves a Corrupt for 7 to put Maher to 2. He's got Dark Ritual and Drain Life in his hand to make a Drain for 2, and thanks to a 7th turn on Mask, he knows that all Maher's holding is a useless Oath of Druids. But instead of winning the game right then and there, he Necros for 2 and says go. The only help Maher could possibly get on this turn is Ivory Mask, a 1 in 43 shot. There are 4 ways Maher can cast Ivory Mask this turn, and they all add up to a 3.8% chance he can cast it no matter when he cracks the floodplain. But the point here is that if you can win the game, you should. We've already seen in this match how thin the margins of victory are. Yes, the odds Maher draws a relevant card are slim, and yes, Brian Davis has the Ivory Mask covered. But what if Maher's follow-up after that is Null Rod and the disc gets shut off? For one thing, we probably wouldn't be talking about this match. In reality, the line between small errors of judgment and nauseating incompetence is thin, and it moves around a lot. Brian Davis missed an on-board kill in Game 3 of the Pro Tour Finals because Brian Davis is determined to turn every game, even the most routine win, into a nail-biter. He'll be on the draw for the remainder of the match, but he's finally got a win under his belt. Maybe it was the confidence that comes with a game win that compelled Davis to keep this hand for Game 4, a 2-lander capable of casting precisely 1 spell. Things look really bleak when Maher resolves Ivory Mask, but what he doesn't know is that Davis's hand contains 2 answers to the mask. After getting Maher to burn 2 impulses to find an Aura of Silence for the first disc, Davis casually casts a Dystopia into 4 open mana. With 1 more mana, Maher could have hard cast Force of Will to protect the Ivory Mask for at least 1 more turn. But protecting the Ivory Mask stretched his resources, his cards, and his mana way too thin. Bob Maher draws 7 cards over the last 6 turns of the game. 1 of them is a counterspell, the rest are garbage. Brian Davis's deck needs a lot of help to win without an active Necropotence, and in Game 4, Bob Maher's deck is happy to oblige. But nothing is ever straightforward for Brian Davis. Here's the call.
All right, so now Brian's plan is to win with 2 Drain Lives. He doesn't have many turns with those treetop villages to play, but he doesn't need, it's like 1 Dark Ritual from pulling it off.
Yeah, I think that would do it.
2 land, or...
But Maher's got the Sword Posture again, it looks like. Oh no, that's a Sacred Ground. Oof.
Alright, so those Wastelands wouldn't have mattered much.
This is getting dangerous.
Yeah, he's going to activate both of them.
So I think Davis needs to top deck some combination of Swamps or Rituals to win.
Davis takes 6.
Swamp here would be huge, and it's a Swamp. So now, the next turn, if he draws a Swamp, he wins.
Does he have enough?
Yeah, he has exactly the amount.
6.
If he drops
He has
Swamp
to draw Swamp next turn.
That's right.
Swamp or Ritual.
Yeah, I did the math on it. So he's 1 Swamp away or Ritual. 1 Swamp away or Ritual
or
from a Game 5 or a Corrupt.
Or another Drain would allow him to win on the following turn.
Right. Would a Demonic Consultation would too, right?
Consult for Ritual will do it if he does it. Go ahead. All right, Bob wants permission.
Okay, let's see.
Or
what does Bob
Mask.
draw?
Reflecting Pool.
That's not a counter
That's
spell.
not counter. Smash. You're at 9? Davis does have 2 turns. Davis has 1 more turn after this one.
All right, let's take a
He
look.
draws. Ritual!
Oh, jeez. That was exciting.
He's going to tap all his mana, right?
Let's see.
He can leave 1 untapped if he really wants to.
Bets, anybody? Anybody? Bets?
He should play around Disrupt. He can't play around Plow. He should play around Disrupt. But I don't see how he loses this, right?
No. Look at his face. Look at his face.
Again, we should be a little quiet.
He's thinking, okay, the last time we did this, he soared something. I
doing
saw
the math.
Disrupt on the deck list. Well, how much
He
do...
saw Disrupt get removed from the game in Game 2.
That's true. What do I do this for? There it is.
Ritual. Confident.
All right.
I can do this.
How much you doing it for, my man?
I think I can. Plays around Disrupt. Oh, activate tree top. 3-minute break. Then it's game 5.
Part of what makes this match so satisfying to watch is its narrative arc. Brian Davis is learning how to play the match as he's playing it. He's figuring out what works and what doesn't. He's observing the tempo of the games and incorporating it into his overall plan. And it plays out on the screen. Game 1 starts just about as well as it could and still results in a loss. Game 2 starts about as poorly as it could, and yet Brian Davis still has the win all rolled up, only to get hosed by a card that was so unlikely to be in Bob Maher's deck after sideboarding that it's hard to really fault Davis for not playing around it. Game 3 is Game 1 through a funhouse mirror that results in an easy win for Davis. Game 4 is a game all its own, but the specter of Game 2, and that's Swords to Plowshares from Hell, is clearly still at the forefront of Brian Davis's mind. But he correctly identifies that at this point in the game, his hand is forced, and his odds of a win go down with each of Maher's draw steps. So Davis puts Maher to the test, and Maher doesn't have it.
All right, welcome back. I'm Randy Bueller. I'm still here with Brian Hacker. We're ready for Game 5. This ought to be fun. Brian Davis is trying to become the 3rd consecutive rookie to win Pro Tour Chicago. He's also trying to become the first person ever to win the finals 5-0.
That was rude. That was really, really rude. You know that? You know what? When he's up there with the trophy, I'm going to tell him you said that.
It would be an amazing accomplishment. I mean, we can't think of someone who's come back from being down 0-2 in the finals. I know
to win 5-0? That's amazing, isn't it?
To win it all.
All right.
All right, let's see how their draws are.
Hope you're having as much fun out there as we are here. This has been crazy.
Ritual,
oh,
no swamp. He cannot keep that.
Well,
Maher's hand is... Maher hasn't really had a good draw the entire match.
That might
Yeah, Brian Davis is already
actually.
starting the mulligan. What? How good is Maher's draw? What's he
Well,
got?
he's got an Aura Silence. It looks like he's got a counter spell. He's got some other white cards, so I think one of them's an Enlightened Tutor.
If he's got Enlightened, Compost, Aura...
Yeah, he has a... I think he had a Swords. Rumor has it that he went to the sideboard in between...
He has Compost in hand. Tundra, Tropical, Compost, Counterspell, Aura of Silence, Plow, and Light of Day.
Okay, so no
the Plow and
Enlightened
the
Tutor.
Light of Day are almost worthless.
Right.
All Plow does is gain life if he sacks his own creatures, and all Light of Day does is hold up Dystopia for a turn. But Bob didn't really have much in the sideboard for this matchup. He had the Compost, which is amazing, but which has only affected one game so far. But he was having trouble with cards. I think some people think maybe he should have brought in Phyrexian Furnace just to cantrip off of it, rather than have some of these dead creature removal cards. Ritual Necro.
Oh, Lord. Unmask?
We're in for a good game.
Almost. Jeez.
There's no force in Bob's hand.
God.
Ritual Necro will hit the table before
I'm
Compost.
switching religions to whoever this guy prays to.
Unmask!
I swear
Good Lord! Please be quiet. Celebrate quietly.
If anybody out there knows who he prays to, let me know afterwards.
By the way, Maher just said that card must be a beating because he could hear us.
It is validating to hear a crowd echo my own reactions to a game of Wizard Squares, and it's comforting to know that in a little more than 20 years, not much has really changed. With the crowd noise, it's like I'm watching this game with friends, a feeling that's conspicuously absent from every other match of Magic I've ever watched. I don't know how to reconcile crowd noise with the integrity of the game, but it's hard to deny how fun it's been to watch these two teenagers quietly move cardboard around for the last hour. Over the next 2 turns, Brian Davis whittles down Bob Maher's permanence to 0. This match has officially lapped itself. We all know how Game 1 ended, especially Brian Davis. That's why his 4th turn Unmask nabs Counterspell and not Force of Will. From Game 1, he knows that this game is going long, certainly long enough for Maher to make his land drops eventually. Davis is operating under the assumption that since all of this counter magic is going to be live at some point anyway, it's better to leave the counterspell that 2-for-1's Maher in his hand. 2 turns later, Brian Davis Necros for 2, hitting a 3rd Wasteland against a brutally mana-screwed opponent.
Another Wasteland.
Wasteland. That card seems okay.
Yeah, it's a little
That's not a
harder to
land.
use the Wasteland.
All right, discard Light a Day. Yeah, I mean the fact that the floodplain untapped, you can't waste it. But
Right.
whenever you get around to it, Bob, I'm ready for you.
Maher rips a Tundra to move up to 2 lands. Davis wastes the Tundra, but Maher casts Impulse in response. Now Brian Davis is in trouble. He's at 4 life, and the probability of this Impulse hitting a second blue source is 44%, which will wake up Maher's counterspells and blow the game wide open. And Maher does find that second blue source, immediately taking a dominating position in a game where he had been forced to discard to hand size just 1 turn earlier. Davis nabs 2 counterspells for the price of 1 with a Drain Life for 3, and a Necro for 2 of his remaining 4 life points finds Persecute to trade with another counterspell. But Brian Davis isn't out of the woods yet. After finding a Forbid, but with no third land to go with it, Maher's forced to cast a main phase Brainstorm, which goes pretty well for Maher. And after his dreaded Disrupt nabs another Feeble Drain Life for 3, he's forced to Brainstorm on his main phase again. Maher still doesn't hit a land, but now he's got 2 counterspells to hit the 2 direct damage spells Brian Davis has left. At this point, Davis could consult for Duress in order to potentially set up a Drain Life into Ritual Corrupt, but instead opts to cast Dark Ritual to feed a Drain Life, the only direct damage spell Davis is capable of casting without the Dark Ritual. It gets countered, forcing Davis to take a turn off to consult for a Swamp to cast the Corrupt and hope that a Sylvan Library failed to find Maher the goods. And it did fail to find him the goods, he just had it all along. If you're getting deja vu, it's because this is exactly what happened in Game 1. Just like in Game 1, Davis's subtle mistakes compounded. The Swamp Davis discarded on turn 2 would have been nice later on, but he over-necroed on the second turn. And losing that Swamp meant he had to over-necro on subsequent turns just to make his land drops. All that extra life lost for no additional cards made it all the easier for Davis to lock himself out. Brian Davis's arc is a story of growth and redemption that looks all but sealed up 6 turns into the final game, only to turn to dust at the drop of a Tundra. He was so close. Game 3 was pretty much a blowout that only looked closer than it was because of a couple of treetop villages, but for the rest of the match, every game came down to the wire. These are the kinds of matches you dream of when you play for high stakes. Every decision mattered. Did you know that if Bob Maher had cracked the floodplain in Game 4 before his final draw, which he didn't do, he would have been 0.06% more likely to draw into an Ivory Mask and prolong the game? It's true. Each decision carried immense weight, threatening to tip the scales all by themselves. Maybe there's something there, because at the end of the day, it was Bob Maher, who barely had any decisions to make at all over the course of the match, who claimed the trophy. It's not that Bob Maher didn't play well, because of course he did. It's just that Brian Davis leapt out way in front in basically every game, decimating Bob Maher's resources and forcing him to play out the top of his deck. The most important choice Bob Maher made all match, which Brian Davis repeatedly forced him to make, was the choice to not quit when the game seemed hopeless. Maher was unflappable the entire match, whereas Brian Davis spent the majority of the match looking very flapped. Every single play Brian Davis made, every Necropotence activation, every Wasteland, every Unmask, represented 1,000 decision trees that splintered into thousands more. And this is the face of a man who was acutely aware of that fact. He was in the driver's seat for the entire match, and not only did he smash the Winnebago into the side of the mountain, but it also burst into flames on impact. 3 out of 5 games started with a first turn Necropotence, and 2 of those games also involved a turn 1 Unmasked for good measure. If you asked Brian Davis if he would sign up for this spread of starting hands before he even sat down for the finals match, he would undoubtedly say yes. But you still have to play the games, and therein lies the rub. Jeez, are you still watching this? If you are, thanks for hanging in there. If you enjoyed this and you want to see more, you should like and comment and subscribe to the channel, because we're all about gaming YouTube here at TCGplayer. And if you didn't like this video, well, YouTube took away dislikes, so you have no recourse whatsoever. All right, and there's a link in the description to TCGplayer.com, and if you follow that link, Pretty Deece gets credit for the sale. You know you were going to buy all your cards there anyway, because we have the best prices and we're powered by local game stores. And you know what? Just bookmark the link. That's all I got. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.